Well, Charles, are you ready?
I guess we're ready to go.
We will, by a few more minutes, I will go through the screen instructions, and we'll have some more people join us. Krista will let them enter. But we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our conversation with Charles. As I mentioned, about 85 people signed up, and we always know there will be some who have change of plans or something came up. The good thing is, and just to remind you that this session is being recorded tonight, and we'll record it in its entirety. Last week with the conversation on racism, we were kind of not recording certain parts. This is a good one just to record the whole thing, and then it will be made available on the website if you wanted to hear it again, or if I have a list of people who are hoping to be with us but couldn't be, so they'll look forward to hearing the recording. I'm Julie Stevens. I'm the Director of Contemplative Practices at Gloria Dei. We're so excited to have lots of Gloria Dei members, but others who aren't in the Gloria Dei faith community. So welcome to everyone here tonight. I would like to review your screen controls. If you've used Zoom and WebEx and other things, maybe you've also used Google Meet at work or with your family, you'll be familiar with a lot of the controls of, this is called Google Meet. If you haven't discovered it already, if you hover your mouse at the bottom of your screen, a white bar appears, and you can kind of keep your mouse within that and look at the symbols with me. I guess it disappears. You have to keep bringing it back. But there's 3 symbols in the middle, one for your microphone on the left, a red telephone in the middle. You'll use that at the end of the night to leave the call. And then one on the right that looks like a camera. If you need to leave the room quickly or you just don't want to be on camera for whatever reason, that's not a problem. You can just click on that and we'll turn your camera off, but you'll still see us and hear us. Again, if you hover on that white bar and look way to the right, don't click on the present now because you'll start sharing your screen, but go beyond that, way to the right, there's 3 stacked dots. And I will have you click on those. It says more options when you hover over those 3 dots. And then a little menu comes up, and change layout is one you might want to use. If you click on change layout, then you'll see various options, sidebar, spotlight, and tiled. Some people don't like to see so many people on screen, and so they might prefer sidebar, which the speaker is really big, and then you might see 4 people who most recently talked. Or spotlight would only have the speaker on, Charles or I, or someone asking a question. So pick whichever one you think works for you, and you can even come back to it in the middle of the night and change, or so just know those options are there for you. Okay, and finally, if you notice yourself, just whatever screen view you choose, you are way up in the right-hand corner in a little rectangle. You'll always be there regardless of the screen you choose, and you can kind of see if you're centered in the screen and adjust your laptop or your computer accordingly. I think those are my instructions. And thank you. You've been so great to keep your mics. With this many people, it's just so helpful to all be muted. And then we'll have a couple times this evening when we'll open it to questions. And then you can, of course, unmute and then mute again when you're done asking your questions. So thanks for doing that.
Or raise your hand if you don't know how to unmute and mute yourself. If you raise your hand, I'll try and look for you so I can help you with that.
Great. Thanks, Krista. Well, the Contemplative Practices Ministry is so pleased to host Charles and host this conversation tonight. Through a weekly podcast and other digital content, large group sessions like this, small groups, and guided retreats, the Contemplative Practices Ministry helps people to see and experience God's presence in ever new ways and in expanding areas in life. And it helps people explore their inner life, their inner spiritual journey. And then the best part is to usually do it in a group setting and to engage with others who are looking to deepen and enrich their relationship with God through reflection and discovery. All of those words so fit our discussion tonight, and it's a perfect lead-in to introducing Charles Ortloff, my guest tonight. Charles retired last fall as senior pastor at Gloria Dei. His life, his insights, his teaching, preaching, and spiritual direction ministry all exemplify contemplative lifestyle and a contemplative journey. Tonight, I'll be posing some questions to Charles based on some things that he wanted to share with all of us tonight. And as I mentioned, we'll have a few places after each kind of section of what he's sharing that I'll ask if you have a question. So as you're hearing him talk and hearing us talk together, if something comes up in your head, jot that down or remember it. And then we'll have several times when you can pose a question to Charles based on what he just shared. Charles, again, it's such a great pleasure to have you here tonight. Welcome.
Nice to be here with all of you. You all look great. You haven't changed a bit. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me to be part of this. Thanks to Dave Berg and the whole staff for allowing me to spend a little time with you. I've wanted to talk to you about this ever since I learned the news of my cancer, but I just wasn't quite ready to go there. I needed to just kind of process myself. But now I hope I'm ready. I don't want you to worry about me or wonder about me. So I thought it'd be best if I just share what I know at this stage. But first, let me tell you how proud I am of Gloria Dei, of how you have managed to be church during the COVID virus. You're just doing a marvelous job. I'm kind of watching over your shoulder here and just very, very proud of all of you. I'm excited for your future. I'm excited for your new senior pastor. And I just am very, very happy for you and look forward to what God will be doing among you.
Thanks, Charles. You know, Charles and everyone, as I mentioned, it's an evening within a Contemplative Practices ministry. So it's this ministry area that seeks to help people experience God, not just live within beliefs or something in your head, but just experiences in your life of God. So Charles, tell me about your first experience of God in your life.
Like many of you, I grew up in the church. Ever since I can remember, I was going to say being dragged to church, but I happily went to church. But it was a lot of adults and maybe more stern. And I don't know that I really felt completely welcome there. My first experience of God, I think, was when I was about 7 years old. Distinctly remember January, going out in my backyard, a foot and a half of fresh snow, stars, no moon. And I would have played in the evening and in the darkness, just making a snowman. But that one night, I just gazed up into the heavens, and there's this sense of awe and wonder came upon me. And I really didn't know what I was experiencing. But I think it's what the psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. It wasn't until much later in my life I realized that was my first experience of seeing God everywhere. As the hymnist says, this is my Father's world.
I love that, because I think we remember you often preaching or talking about your love of nature, how you found God in that, your trips to Quarry Hill. So that's really cool that your first experience of God was there. Looking at everyone on screen, looking at you, it just seems like forever since we've gathered, even just at church. I mean, it's been since mid-March. And looking at you, it's been forever since we've all collectively had a chance to visit with you. And so much has changed for you during these last 10 months, just major changes. So just tell us about what that's been like for you.
Well, of course, I retired, and many of you have gone through that. And it was a bigger deal than I thought it was going to be. A lot of good things. I don't miss the annual meetings at all, but I miss you, and I miss my routine, and I miss opportunities to serve. I was a bit lost. Sort of got my feet on the ground again, was doing some work with a funeral home, and I felt like, okay, I'm starting to figure this out. And then COVID-19 hit, and like all of you, we've just got quarantined. And but the big thing was this business of cancer. I did not expect this at all. Karen and I, after 2 or 3 weeks of testing. We sat down with the doctor, and he told us that I had stage 4 prostate cancer. And I don't know that I heard too much after that, but I think I heard there is no cure. And our goal is to keep you alive so that you die of something else. Now, don't quote me on that. I mean, I was kind of not really with it after that. I really have to thank God for being in Rochester with Mayo. The doctors and my team is just fabulous. Just met with them today again. And I appreciate their honesty. And there's a thread through all 3 of these, my retirement, COVID, and cancer, is I didn't have any control over my life. And this cancer business permanently changes my life, changes what we had planned for retirement. I wasn't expecting this at all.
Yeah, you kind of got hit with a triple whammy since we witnessed your retirement, and so much has come to you and to Karen as well. I'm thinking of you, Charles, and you spent 40 plus years as a pastor at various churches, as a caregiver in times of illness, as a comforter and an advisor, and having wisdom to share with people in really challenging situations. And here you are in your own challenging situation, receiving care from others. How has that been for your spiritual journey? What is that like to be in that reversal of roles?
Well, it's really different than being on the other side, which I spent most of my time on. I've really lived a charmed and blessed life. I have not had illness or tragedies that we've walked with together in your lives. So the experience like this cracks one open. Your heart and your mind are broken open. Julia, several months, maybe a year ago, you gave us a phrase to ponder on. You probably remember. In the garden of gentle sanity, may you be bombarded by coconuts of wakefulness. Well, my life with you before I retired was this garden. It was beautiful. Gentle sanity, it all made sense. And now in the last 10 months, these coconuts been bopping me on the head. This is painful stuff. You all know this, obviously. But it's for a purpose of wakefulness, and it's the wakefulness that tonight I'd like to talk to you about, and how I believe that God is using this to wake me up into my journey.
Mm. And that strikes me because you've always struck me as one of the most awake, cracked open people. Like you could access your heart and your spiritual journey, but there's something obviously different this time for you.
Well, apparently not. Apparently there's more to crack open. I would have agreed with that. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, maybe that hint of it's facing mortality. I think I've heard you say there's this obviously something different with the cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, I think everyone you talk to, there's a clarity when you are faced with the possibility that your death is near. And I've never faced that. And I'm sure many of you have, and you know what I'm talking about. And yeah.
So you have a wisdom about you. Again, you've always been this wise person, but I'm sensing there's a new wisdom about this experience. So just tell us about that wisdom that you've gained through this experience of cancer.
The in one word, I would say surrender.
Our culture hears that word and we're going, it seems very passive and very giving up. And so I want to hear you talk more about that, because it isn't a word we like to hear often.
When you think about it, it's at the center of our Lord's ministry. He's surrendering. It's in Gethsemane on Maundy, Thursday evening. He's praying, Father, I'd rather not have this, but not my will, but yours be done. I think that word is what helped me begin to find some sense of meaning in all this, that I too was to follow Jesus' example, pick up my cross. And I think he was calling me to surrender to what is, to choose the life I have. Surrender doesn't mean, well, what are you going to do? It means getting up every day saying, I choose this life. And I know that was very hard for me. They're very, very hard.
Yeah, so choosing, yes, just say more about that. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I was not surrendering. I was resisting. For weeks after I received this diagnosis, I'd wake up every morning and say, I don't want this. I really don't want this. I felt claustrophobic. I felt my world caving in on me. I'd spend an hour or two every morning just kind of saying, well, it's what you have, kiddo. And the more I resisted what is, the more suffering I had. And the more my suffering stayed with me in my, I don't want this.
And that's another word that catches me up short, because I hear suffering, I might think of physical suffering, but I know there's many layers of that. Can you elaborate about what do you mean when you're saying suffering?
Well, I've been very blessed so far in the journey. I don't have a lot of pain. But when I talk about suffering, I mean that inner suffering, that worry, that panic in the middle of the night, that your mind just goes into all sorts of what ifs in the past and what are you going to miss in the future? That kind of suffering, that I don't want this.
Yeah, one of the more helpful definitions I remember from a class of yours was that suffering means anything that isn't the way I want it. That was super helpful for me because I hadn't experienced certain sufferings, but I can relate to, I don't like this, that way, or it's that type of more general thing, I think, too, that you're referring to, which is helpful. So if you were in this mode of suffering for a while, how did you move away from suffering and into surrender?
And let me be clear, it's not like turning the switch off one day you're suffering and next day everything's just fine. It's a progression, and almost every morning you have to kind of claw your way back into this. But when I started thinking about Jesus, especially his last days here, and his example to follow him, he surrendered to what was going to happen to him. He told his disciples that it will happen to them too, and they will go through a difficult time. They'll all desert him, but they didn't surrender that. They fought it, and because of that, their inner suffering was much more difficult. On the other hand, Mary, the mother of our Lord, when she's told she's going to bear the Christ, at first she resists. How can this be? But then she says, let it be. She surrendered awfully quickly. And I think she is the model for us in our times of things don't make sense. Surrender with Mary to say, let it be. I early on decided I couldn't manage this if I didn't think God was part of this. I don't mean God caused it, but God jumped in both feet. And God had a plan in this. And I believe his plan is to transform me. And as Julie and I were talking, getting ready for this, and she kept asking, well, but what do you mean by transform? It just suddenly dawned on me that trans means beyond forms. And as we start our relationship with God, we find God in forms. Our mother or father who love us, a body that's healthy, success in our jobs, creation. But to be transformed may very well be to find God when these things aren't there anymore. What will you do when you get to be a point in your life where you're losing those things? Will you lose God? I really was. I think that's the experience of Job. if you read, all these things are taken away from him, his family, his possessions, his health, and he can't find God anymore. And I think that's what was happening to Jesus on the cross. I've talked before, I probably didn't understand what I was talking about, to die before you die, so you never have to be afraid again. As we all approach death, the forms of life, how sweet they are, they're taken away from us. And if that's the only place we've ever found God, then where will God be? But I think what God has been doing for me in this transformative experience is to be able to find God apart from the forms. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. In a moment, everyone, I'm going to open it up to your questions regarding surrender. But Charles, let me pose one question to you. Can you differentiate for me between acceptance and surrender?
Well, that's just my definitions. But a passive acceptance, from my point of view, where it doesn't do you much good. It's kind of like being in a conversation with somebody that's an argument, and finally you say, whatever. You really haven't you're just kind of okay. What we're talking about here is, I don't understand this, but I believe, God, you're in it. And I believe you will show up. And therefore, I'm going to give it my best. And I'm going to be present and looking and watching for you every minute to how you are going to be working. So that's what I would say the difference is, to give it a good face, to say, I know you're here, God. I can't find you. I can't see you in this cancer, in growing older, in losing a loved one. But I'm going to keep hanging on each day to know that you are there.
Yeah. I would open it now to all of you. What question do you have for Charles about his surrender, or just surrender in general? We'll just take a pause with this chunk of what Charles has just shared. Any questions you would have? He's so good at answering things. So just, if you have a wondering or a question, anyone have a question? And just feel free, we might not see you, but just feel free to unmute and pose that question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Julie. This is Marilyn. I have a question for Charles. When you faced this surrender, did you all of a sudden have this peace, this calm experience?
Thanks, Marilyn.
Great question. Yes and no. Yes, there was this burden removed, but it wasn't a permanent thing. And as I engaged in things in my regular life, I could see as the day goes on, I began to lose some of that sense of peace that passes all understanding. And so for me, nights are difficult, and I front load a lot of stuff in my life to hold on to these promises. I need to put stuff at the end of my day also, because that's when I seem to be losing this sense. You remember the disciples when Jesus walked on the water and came to them, and Peter said, if it's you, well, he gets out in the water. Then he starts looking around at the wind and the wave, and then he sinks. I think that's typical of me, that, hey, I'm walking on the water. This is great. Look at me. All of a sudden. So I've begun to see that's the pattern, not to beat myself up, but just to say I need to look more carefully and closely and hang on to this Jesus.
Yeah. Charles, Carol Fisher had a question. Did you get mad at God?
Surprisingly not. Karen asked me many times, are you angry? And maybe I was just deluding myself. I'm okay with that I could have been. You know, the stages of grief, bargaining, anger, denial, depression. I did a lot of bargaining, there's so many things I could do for you, God, if you just let me live. And I'm still doing it. I'm shamelessly doing it.
That's good. That's good.
But I kept coming up with God has been so good to me in my life, just way, way, way beyond my years at Gloria Dei. Just never deserved such a wonderful congregation. And God has always done such good. Who am I to question what he's doing now? And but bargaining, yes.
Good. Good. Other questions about surrender? Charles' experience of that, or just questions about surrender in general? Well, that's all right. As the content will kind of build and weave in here, and hold your, if you have questions as we go on, that'll be great. And we'll open it up for some general questions at the end too. So thanks for the questions so far. So Charles, you've shared about surrender, and that's just such a key thing I know for you. I think that's why you put it first. It's just important for your journey right now. So what other wisdom have you gained from your experience with cancer?
You all know I do a lot of reading, and the authors of these books may be some of my best spiritual counselors. I came across one quote that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. God is not going to give you answers, but God will give you love. Mm-hmm. And that was a real aha moment for me. And I began to see my whole journey till I die differently.
Yeah, so I want to hear more about that, because answers are just, we're always problem solving and seeking answers. So tell me more about what that aha moment was like for you.
Well, I've been known to be in my head. People have suggested that. I know you don't know that. It's hard to believe, but I go to my head and I just stay there. And as I said earlier, the 5 stages of grief, they're all in your head. The anger, the denial, the bargaining. There was just no end to it being in my head. Then I read another comment. You can never win an argument with your imagination. Your imagination will always create another way of looking at this. And both those comments, just stop it, stop asking questions. It's a dead end. Stop arguing with your mind. If only, what if, why not? Stop.
Yeah, and I think the more we're in our minds, we've all found out, the more inner suffering we do create. Seeing things in the future that never happened, going back to the past, not being in that present moment. So I'm assuming that you might be indicating that the more you're in your head, you had more worry, more kind of all that suffering type thing. So what kind of got you over that? You were talking about not looking for answers, but looking for God's love, looking for love. How did you make that transition?
It's kind of like somebody telling you stop eating dirt. when you realize, oh yeah, that's a pretty dumb idea. That's kind of how I work, and all of a sudden, yeah. Why do I keep going to my head? It just gets me in deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
If you notice Jesus in the Gospels, he doesn't give the disciples answers. He says, follow me. Doesn't tell them where we're going. Doesn't tell them what we're going to do. Doesn't tell them what the end game is until halfway through. The only thing he offers them is a relationship with him. I think that's pretty telling. The one thing Jesus says to you and me, pick up your cross and follow me. He doesn't answer the question why. He just says, be in a relationship with me.
Can you
Go ahead.
put some words to that? If you're experiencing God's love, what does that feel like to you? How is that experience for you? What words can you put to that?
Well, there are the Bible passages, that peace that passes all understanding. That's probably the best one. There's a peace that comes to us that our mind can't get us there. It's hard to explain. I've walked with some of your loved ones as they're dying, and it doesn't make any sense. But I witnessed in your loved ones a sense of peace about them that can't really explain, except that relationship with Christ is real. It's present to them. So it's a peace. It's an ease. It's a sense of being loved. Yeah, all those good things, huh?
Yeah.
There's another neat quote that I kind of remind myself every morning when I get up. When the mind weeps over what is lost, the heart rejoices over what is gained. And the mind weeps because we don't have any control. That's really what I've been going through, with all three of these things: retirement, COVID, and cancer. But the heart rejoices over what is gained, and that's relationships. I've found relationships with my family, with my neighbors, with creation, and with God. I spoke to my oncologist today about that, and he said it's a pretty common experience that people who face their death give up asking questions, begin to just feel a deep, deep love. So for me at this stage, I consciously made the plan to stop being in my head asking questions. I wasn't going to get any. Stop it.
Yeah.
You ever have to say to yourself, stop that?
Yeah. Sometimes we actually do, don't we? It's actually a conscious words that we need to say to ourselves.
And seek love.
Yeah.
God's not going to give you answers to many of the questions you have, but boy, will God give you love.
Yeah. That's
And
beautiful.
that's been my experience, and that's what's been making this manageable in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. So listeners, here's another place we've had Jim and Renee sent a question in, and I'll pose that to Charles in a moment. But Charles was just talking about not seeking answers, but seeking that love of God. So do you have any questions to ask Charles about this insight, or to not seek answers, but relationship? Either a question for him, or I've heard people who struggled with this too and had come to a certain understanding for themselves of this. Let me start it off with Jim and Renee's question, though, Charles. Is there a relationship between surrendering and living in the present moment?
Yeah, absolutely. The only place where God is right here and now.
Yeah.
And the mind would rather have us in the past or the future. The mind can control that. But it's being in the present, that's the only place God is. And that's where God meets us. And that's the scary thing. It's easier to always be in the past and reliving the past, and we have some control over it. And the same thing with the future. We can worry about the future. We can blame ourselves for the past, but the future or the present is where God is. And so that's part of the surrender to what is.
Yeah.
I'd hope something else would happen, but that isn't happening. This is. And lo and behold, as they say, that's how God is showing up for me in this beloved presence in my life.
Yeah. That's great. People are chatting in questions now. Amy Lynn has, when God gives you love, what does that look like to you?
Well, that's a good question. It's my heart, whatever's been pressing on it is just suddenly not there anymore. It's this sense of, what was I worried about? Why was I upset? Why was I all those kind of things? It's almost like being brought into a whole different reality. That said, gee, none of that makes any sense. Why was I bothered? It feels also in terms of my relationship to the world and other people, and just much more compassionate and long suffering and gentle, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. I have one more chatted in question, and then anyone else to pose questions after this one. This is Allison Walton. How do you manage your own peace with unanswered questions against your loved ones who may be pressed for those answers? Good question.
Well, we're not at the end of this story yet, and so we had a very nice 4th of July, and I think my family is watching me as always, just wondering, well, how is he going to handle this? And I think the better I handle it, the better they will handle it. If they can see from me that I've never thought about death so much, but I've never felt so alive. Being their dad, they've lived with this preacher for 40 years. You think it's hard having a parent in your house who likes to preach at you. I feel very bad for my kids sometimes. They have to come and listen to me at church too. But the best sermon I think I can preach to them now is not that I'm a perfect person or that I've got it all together, but there are these moments where I've never felt so alive and so much filled with love.
Great. Beautiful. Thanks, you guys, for these great questions. Other questions that you want to pose, speaking them out loud or chatting in? Oh, here's Dallas and Ruth. We often talked about finding God around the edges of power. Is surrendering another way to get at this?
Yeah, I think so. It's one of Richard Rohr's comments that Jesus did most of his ministry at the edges, amongst the poor and the suffering and the lonely, and some of us find that by going to third world countries where people live off $1 a day and yet they're happier than we are. So rubbing elbows with, I think it's the same for cancer. We have now been put to the edge, the margins, and lo and behold, that seems to be where Jesus is. That seems to be where God is, and it's totally counterintuitive. The mind cannot get you there, but that seems to be the experience of many people. That, well, yeah.
And that kind of hits at too. I think we bond with other people in our suffering. I see that in groups that I'll host, as like people will discover common journeys or common struggles, and they create a bond through that. And it's a beautiful thing in our suffering that we connect so well. Yeah,
I think so. Successes drive us apart. Suffering bonds us. We become a band of brothers and sisters. Yeah.
Yes. Got some great questions coming in. Dave Berg, Pastor Dave, has anticipated the next part of our evening. He said, moving through stages of grief often requires doing the work. What practices, work, or rituals helped you to move to a place of surrender? So we might hold off on that for our next part. Good question, Dave. We will be coming to that soon. Thank you. And Carol Fisher, are there any things you would have changed as you pastored dying or sick people now that you've had a cancer diagnosis? good one.
Yeah, probably everything, but please don't ask for your honorariums back.
Yeah.
I've already spent them. Just kidding. Sure.
Now you just so speak from your personal experience. Oh my gosh, it would be a different feel, wouldn't it?
I think to spend more time with people, just quietly with them in silence, as opposed to having a lot of answers, which I could do if I have to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would have had more confidence that if we stay with this pain, if we stay with the silence, and maybe by staying with them, together with them, that rather than blessing people, sending them on their way. And so I hadn't thought about it until you raised it, Carol, but maybe more of a ministry of just presence with people, and not have answers, but just have a presence that in this silence, in this time of absence, that God does show up.
If I could, Charles, pose one last thing to you before we move on to the next part, is I think a metaphor of a little child holding a parent's or grandparent's hand. Is that helpful in this? That relationship the little kid isn't looking for answers, just that relationship. Is that a helpful image maybe of how you've no seeking for answers, but just trusting in that hand? And
yeah, there's a reason I think that God says you must be like children. I think he's referring to that mind that gets in the way, and it stops us from experiencing God. So I think children have a leg up on us in that they don't expect to understand, but they know all about love. And we can know all about love too if we just give ourselves a little time with that. How would I sense God's love in this whole thing? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Pastor Dave gave us the perfect segue into our final part of this evening. Charles, we have time for one more insight. It's insight you wanted to share, some wisdom that you've gained during your time with cancer. So what's that final thing you would share with us tonight?
I realized how important it was, my practices, practicing my faith. Practice kind of implies rehearsing. I'm just practicing now. It's not the real thing. Especially contemplative practicing, which you, Julie, are helping us.
Yeah, I'm jumping all over this question. And there's this point here because it's very important. It's this ministry area. So when you say contemplative practices or spiritual practices, what do you mean, and how have you been living that out?
Well, there are all sorts of practices we should do, and for a variety of reasons, because God tells us to. But for me, I lean towards the contemplative, but from my perspective, the places where I experience God's love. And I go more and more to those. I have a catalog of these are the places, and if I don't get to the other practices, that's okay. But I really want to get to those places where I just take it all in, and God is just so wonderful. Yeah.
And you've always been a person of having practices and routines and things, but why has that been so important, or what have you found different now, that why they've been things that you really needed to lean into?
I don't know if I should say this or not. That got your attention, huh? But I think more people than just myself have experienced this, but God has seemed to be awfully silent. Remember when the astronauts were trying to land on the moon, and they would go behind the moon for a while, and we'd all hold our breath. Oh, I hope they come around on the other side, right? Well, that might be a good image of these last 9 months for me. And it's been the most difficult part, that God seems to have gone silent. I talked about forms, and beyond forms. Prior to retirement, the friendships I had at Gloria Dei, that's so wonderful. It's just a reflection of God in my life. And writing sermons, I wasn't doing that. God was doing that, and I knew that. And a healthy body. But in the last 8-10 months, those forms have been removed, and I've had to ask myself, how do I hear God now?
So as you experienced that, did you lean more into some new practices, or say more about kind of what you've settled into now?
Well, I was scrambling there the first couple of weeks with this news. Well, now what do I do? Mm-hmm. And I just, what do they say? If you don't feel it, fake it. Just start mm-hmm. doing the practices, mm-hmm. knowing that God will show up. And I began to tap into those practices that I found God in the past, and I began to find God again. Not so much in the form, but more in the formless. But yeah, so things like Bible study, of course, worship, of course, having friends. I sure miss the people of Gloria Dei, and having friends is such a wonderful spiritual practice, and I've missed that. Someone suggested owning a dog, and that could be a wonderful spiritual practice. The kind of unconditional love that a dog might be giving, huh? But meditation, practicing silence, being in nature. I think people today are having a tough time with COVID-19, the solitude and silence.
Yeah.
And solitude is one of the most severe punishments we can place on somebody, solitary confinement. It breaks people. I think this is so hard for people that had no experience of what do I do in this time of silence. Whereas, Julie, I think in your practicing 15, 20 minutes of silence at some of your retreats, with the idea that just stay there for a while and see what happens and see if God shows up.
Yeah, it's said that silence is God's primary language. So
yeah.
And
I think what a gift it is for us to be practicing that, so that when these times of tragedy come into our lives and that we just feel silence, to know that God will show up, and to not feel so discouraged and hopeless. You've been here, you've practiced this, you've been preparing for this day. And so I went to some of those practices of silence. I do it morning and evening now, and I try to get out to Corey Hills as well. And it sometimes takes a while, but I begin to experience again God's presence in my life.
Mm-hmm. Other practices?
Memory work, which we all hated when we were going through confirmation, right? But I've picked up about 15, 20 minutes of memory work, and I'll wake up in the morning and I'll feel empty. I'll start going for my walk, and I'll walk out about a mile and just be listening for God. Turn around, come back, and then I'll start doing the memory work. And all of the things that I was kind of whining to God about are found in the memory work.
Yeah, it's that Philippians verse. Whatever is good, whatever is true. Think about those things.
Yeah.
Steep yourself in positive. Yeah.
How many of the verses I memorized said, "Don't worry about anything." Oh yeah, that's mm-hmm. right. I love you. I love the birds. Love the flowers. I love you. Aren't you of more value than birds? Oh yeah, that's right. I guess I am. You know, as I would go through this 15, 20 minutes of things I memorized, all of the things that I was griping about, that God was saying, nothing's changed, you silly guy. And then we could start a conversation. So the memory work is really, really important to me. Part of one of the most important parts of filling myself up each day, as I said, in terms of you get the peace for a while, then all of a sudden it's gone. Well, start filling stuff back in. Friends really, really help. Being in nature really, really helps. But the memory verses are really powerful in terms of they're conversation starters. When God is just getting quiet, it's not God. It's you're just not listening. And so a good place to start listening is in the Bible. That's what I found.
Yeah. And you've mentioned a story or two that's given you a sense of calm, a Bible story.
Well, that's it. That's another part of this, that one day it just dawned on me, I'm going to have cancer the rest of my life. There's no cure. And I could just feel a pity party coming in. You know what a pity party is? I think that's kind of common in AA. Until I remembered Paul and his thorn in the flesh. He was having a pity party. He was praying to God, oh, take this away from me. And we don't know what it was. Maybe we think maybe he was going blind. And we can agree with Paul. Well, it'd be nice if you didn't have to have that. And then Paul, as you know, discovered that when I'm weak, then I'm strong. In my weakness, I tap into Christ. So bring it on, Paul was saying. Well, how could I complain if it's good enough for Paul? It's good enough for me.
Yeah.
So as we find Bible stories that are somewhat like ours, Mary in this very difficult position, she says, well, let it be. She's being present to what is her life. I find those very helpful of strategies for, okay, stop pitting yourself, get up, get going. God is going with you. There's a plan.
Yeah. Listeners, soon I'll open it to your questions, either chatted or you want to unmute and ask a question. Charles, I would make one observation is that as I've listened to surrender, seeking love instead of answers, now practices, there's a circularity there. They all seem to lead to love, cracked open to love. The practices take you to that loving relationship, to hearing that voice of God. Am I describing that right?
Well, it sounds very biblical to me, doesn't it? 1 Corinthians 13, this shall fade, that shall fade, but faith, hope, and love, these three abide.
Yeah.
And the greatest of these is love. And I think that's what the second half of life is about. As we start contracting, things start getting less in our lives and things are taken away, that we start decluttering stuff, that we might have more and more room for what will abide, and that is this business of love. I left ministry at Gloria Dei with a couple Bible verses in my head that I was thinking about preaching on. I didn't. But one was Enoch, and it was just very, very strong. We don't know much about this guy Enoch, except he walked with God, and then all of a sudden he wasn't anymore. And it's as if to say, that's all you need to know about Enoch. He was just in this loving relationship, and one day we didn't see him around anymore. But really nothing changed for him. And I think that's what I think it would be great for all of us as we explore that loving relationship with God, and we begin to realize that that's the bridge between here and there, and nothing really of importance changes. We'll continue to have those conversations, those loving hands that hold on to us. So.
So here's another place that you could ask questions about practices that Charles has, or what the place of practices has been for him in this time of difficulty. Dallas and Ruth, has your cello playing been a source of solace?
That is one of the most sore spots of this whole thing. I don't want to complain, so please don't repeat this. But as I was doing my MRI, I was told to lift my arms up like this. And I'm a very compliant person, so I kept them up. And it was a long time. And finally I said, can I put them down now? And I think I did something to my, what is it called? Rotator cuff.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to play my cello, but I just got permission today from my doctor. We're going to get that fixed. I'm doing some PT tomorrow, and I'm going to go back and play, practice my cello. But yes.
Good.
Talk about something being in the moment. It puts you entirely in the moment, and I missed it entirely. And yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dallas, for asking.
Yeah. Other questions about practices, the role of practices during times when we're really struggling to get our bearing. Experiences any of you have had with, I'll just kind of more generally open it up, and things you'd like to state about your own journey with surrender, or just giving away, forget answers, I'm just going to seek God, or practices you have. There's a richness in the sharing of the group, the wisdom of the group. So either a question for Charles or something you just wanted to share.
I have a touch screen. I was trying to unmute with my finger.
Oh,
and
good.
I don't have a touch screen.
Good. No, you've got it.
This is more of just a comment. A number of years ago, I was in a museum in Chicago with my daughter's family. And my granddaughter was in a stroller. And she was fussing and kicking and fussing and fussing. And I bent over and I looked at her and I said, "What's the matter, Ruby?" She grabbed a hold of my little finger and never fussed the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Charles, when God reaches out his hand, grab his little finger. He's there. And his love will be there with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd accept your little finger if that would work out. Just be a good substitute.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very powerful.
Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Amy Lynn. Can you say more about memory work? How do you approach that?
I didn't really know what I had until I would keep memorizing and saying it. Oh, my, there's answers there. There's answers. It's just like a gold mine, and it just more and more. I just picked out things that we all kind of love. Philippians 4, Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who watches over you does not sleep. He who watches over Israel does not slumber or sleep. What was your question again? What was the question?
Let me repeat it. It's sorry. Can you say more about memory work? How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, there's something about putting it inside of us here that rather than reading it, and that it seems to be then flowing from inside of you, and it's almost like we know that the Spirit dwells inside of us. Paul in the 8th chapter of Romans says that when we can't pray, the Spirit inside of us prays for us. And it's memory work, I think, is almost that we're listening to God inside of us, that God using the Scripture as opposed to God coming from outside of us. And as I say it as I'm going along, I suddenly realize, oh yeah, that's I'm worried right now, and here it says, don't worry about anything. Your Heavenly Father knows you need all these things. All you gotta do is seek the kingdom of God, seek the inner life. So the memory work, as opposed to reading it, I think when we read things, we tend to gloss over and not really digest it and chew on. A lot of pastors, I'm not one, would memorize the text they're preaching on, and they found that was a real great way of really staying with everything that's there and getting the most out of it. My RAM memory was very small, and if I memorized that, I couldn't remember a lot of my sermons, so I didn't do that. But so I think there is something about that, holding on to it. You seem to really process it much better and get all there's so much good stuff in it. So yeah.
Other questions, other sharings, just generally from our themes tonight.
Julie, this is Lynn Miller. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Lynn.
Hi, I'm on the phone. So, Charles, there's something we've learned from you, and I'm wondering if you're practicing what you preached. And
No,
that
cut
is,
it out. None of that.
Oh,
Cut
yeah,
her off.
yeah, oh no, here you go. So you always, what I learned from you is when we get up in the morning, we say, okay, God, what is it that you and I are going to do together today? Is it, be it spiritual or physical? And then you proceed to do that. And then you go to bed at night and say, okay, God, let's check it off. Did we get everything done that we were wanting to do today? So have you been practicing that?
Next question.
I knew you'd try to avoid me.
I said at the beginning, this is a lot harder living it than talking about it. And I hope you didn't come tonight thinking that I was living all the answers, that I'd given you all the. You're right. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate that. That should be on my folder here too of things I do every morning when I get up. Yeah. I have been asking God throughout this is what do you want me to do? Use me. And in a strange sort of way, cancer I think might be how God uses me, and certainly has caused me to focus. To energize me. I've got 3 different piles of writings I'm working on right now in terms of, I don't know what it'll turn out to be, but I was just really kind of drifting, and all of a sudden cancer has gotten my attention, and I'm focusing, and but thank you, Lynn. I was making fun, so I hope you don't take that personal. I can't see your face. I don't know why you're what you're thinking of me right now.
No comment.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. That's what I thought. I'm in trouble.
Yeah. Good question, Lynn. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions or
Julie?
comments? Yes.
Dwayne.
Oh, Dwayne.
Pastor, I'm going to throw you either a softball or a hardball. You were at the early stage of this evening, you were kind of musing around about trying to enter peacefulness and not necessarily having to be in control of those things. And there have been times when that has been part of discussions that I've been a party at with you, is the elements of carrying the responsibility of managing the things that were there, in that you and I had both experienced those kinds of things in life at different times. And yet I think we both had found that there's often the best participation in that when we remember and realize that it is not our sole responsibility. As a matter of fact, it's probably very little our responsibility, but rather that we allow the right things to take place in the group that we might be with, and or in the circumstance that we might be in. And I'm wondering if that is still ringing for you, and as you were reflecting, I sense that might also be still powerful for you.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's less and less me doing something and more God working through me. And Paul writes in Philippians 4, let your gentleness be seen by everybody. And I feel that gentleness is an open door for people to talk to me. The guy who was giving me my shot today on my butt, kind of interesting, he's talking to you about your church and religion, and he's giving you a shot. Very, very nice guy. And neither of us found that to be uncomfortable, but now that I think about it. But he was one who didn't have any church, and yet I think there was just being open to letting God use me, right? and just showing up and being present. And he asked the questions, and I had. So I think you're right, Dwayne. Yeah. But as you know, when I first arrived, especially, I think I was pretty anal type person there, and I wanted to have a lot of control of stuff, and I began to let loose some of that anyway. And now I'm going to go crazy if I try to hang on to all those things now. And yes, I appreciate that reminder. Thank you. Yeah.
Charles, I have a question for you, and please, listeners, think of more questions. This is wonderful discussion. Charles, what advice would you have for someone, perhaps who's younger, but that doesn't necessarily mean they haven't had horrible things that they're dealing with, but let's say someone younger, someone before having big health problems or huge struggles, what do you recommend? You would probably recommend that we develop some practices. You've talked about it's hard to learn how to swim when you're drowning, there is some wisdom probably for all of us, even before difficult things start happening, to have some routines, some practices, some wonderful, powerful ways of connecting with God already in place.
Yeah, obviously, and to somehow make the transition from we do these things because we're told to do that, and it's the rules, and so okay, I'll go to church, to this is learning how to swim, and A, it should be fun, and B, you may really need this sometimes. I don't know if we ever help people make that connection that yes, you do have to do this, but let's think of some other reasons why you're doing this, and it's really a lot of fun to swim. And B, boy, if you were ever out in a situation where you needed this, you'd be so happy that we taught you to swim. So the same thing with whether it's silence. I can't be silent. My mind always is chattering. Yep. That's right, but it's tremendously relaxing to just be able to quiet your mind down and to go to sleep. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'd try to sell it to ourselves and then to our children that there's something more than just why am I doing this? Because I told you so.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other questions, sharings? This is great. Wonderful.
Julie, this is Betty. And,
hi, Betty.
Charles, you said you got a shot today. Do you have a chemo program, or what's happening medically?
I'm on a need-to-know basis. I don't want to talk too much. Yeah, I got a shot today, and I think the shot was hormone treatment. And I don't want to say too much, not because I'm afraid of revealing things, but I'm afraid in this wonderful medical community, I will say it's so wrong that people will just, what's he talking about? Or who are his doctors? So, yeah, the shot was hormone treatment. And so that's one way of approaching prostate cancer. So.
Go.
Thanks, Betty.
Yeah.
Charles.
Yes.
This is Jim Hare.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, you've been such an inspiration to me. I just want to thank you. And I'm even starting to part my hair just like yours. I do have a question. We've talked about this over the years. How's your sleeping pattern? Are you able to sleep at night?
Then we turn it off, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to worry about not sleeping 7-8 hours in a row until I read somewhere that the Puritans used to go to bed with the chickens. When the sun went down, they went to bed. Then after that cycle of what's the drug that puts you to sleep? Serotonin, is that right?
Could be.
Okay. Anyway.
Melatonin.
I'm sorry, melatonin.
Yeah.
The older you get, the less you have. So you after about 4 or 5 hours, you wake up. And they would get up and do ironing and go to their neighbors and play cards, from 11 o'clock to 2 in the morning. Then they'd go back home and get 4 more hours. I didn't know that. Did you know that? So I don't look at that 8 hours of constant as something which I necessarily need. But if I wake up, I start to use this as a time for God is calling. And maybe the reason I'm waking up is there's things I've been carrying all day, and now that I have less stuff to push it down and pretend it's not there, this might be a good time just to chat with God a little bit.
Good question. Thanks, Jim. We're beginning to move towards the final part of our evening now, and just any remaining questions or observations from your own journey. When Charles and I were talking about tonight, we were knowing that so many of you are sitting there too with all kinds of journeys and health challenges that you had or don't have, or so. Charles, just hearing you talk has been so helpful, and your openness and sharing. But just any remaining sharings or questions from any of you tonight.
Charles, this is Larry. Over the years, I know you've read a lot of different books on different views of the Bible, interpretations, and you always could come up with some really interesting books to read. And they were very thought-provoking. Now that you're at where you're at, and you're kind of in the surrender phase, is it any clearer than it was 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think about a lot of the conversations we've had and sermons I've written, and my mind is a bit systematic in how it approaches things, and so yeah, I'm starting to put together some of the thoughts that we played around with, and that's one book that I'm working on right now. It's called A Children's Bible for Adults. Remember those children's Bibles we all had and we saw and we lived with, and they had Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden, and there's this angel with a sword there. There's Noah getting on the ark and all these other people, save me. Anyway, I grew up with those stories, but I see them differently now. That and anyway, I'm shamelessly promoting my books. So, so thank you, Larry. I guess that's enough for me to say that hopefully that there'll be something. I'm also doing one on the first 90 days after hearing the diagnosis of cancer. I don't know for you when you've gone through some of these difficult things, whether it's grief or whether it's, but I right away started that very first day just journaling, and I found it fascinating, the ups and downs. I've found it fascinating to see where all the blind spots of my faith, so to speak. So I hope someday to put that in a book form as well. So
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to promote your book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The dollar's in the mail, Larry. Just be looking for it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Any final questions, Krista?
I just wanted to say thanks too for the way that you've shared this story, because just even what you said right now, I was like, yep, that's what I've been doing for 4 months. Of the form has changed, and where the bargaining comes in, and where the surrender lies, and the times that I find myself feeling like I'm fully alive in the time of pandemic is when I'm cracked open with love. And so, a lot has changed within our faith practices. And so all of those things that you've relayed, I just wanted to say out loud, it's just all of those pieces have just really been resonating. I don't even know the thoughts I have fully on it, other than thank you for that process and sharing that process, because it speaks what your wisdom speaks to directly in this time, in this way. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, Krista. I appreciate it. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And that's a wonderful comment, Krista, because though Charles, rightfully, because of the 3 things he's gone through, cancer, that really got your attention. But the points tonight apply to retirement, to COVID that we've all been going through, to cancer, a health diagnosis. So yeah, super helpful, Charles. Thank you. Last chance. Just love to, if anyone has any last comment or question. Charles, I'm going to give you, Leary, if we're going to do something to close in a second. If you could mute your mic, that would be great, because we'll be speaking out loud. Thank you. Charles, a last summary statement, if you'd like.
Oh, I had one here somewhere. Now I put it away. Well, it's been great seeing you all, and the teacher always gets more than the students out of something, and so I'm sort of the teacher here, and having touched this for the last 2-3 weeks, my takeaway is that I need to surrender to what is and spend time not in my questions, but in pursuing love, and I pursue love in the practices. So there is this thread that tonight was there, and it does give me a real quick way of getting into what should I be doing, and so thank you for that. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for your interest, your prayers. I do appreciate them. Had a very, very good meeting with the oncologist today, and I just can't say enough about how supportive and wonderful they are, and so I think I feel more positive now that I have in 12, 13 weeks, and so that's a good place to be. Yeah. So thank you. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, we hate to have this night end. It's Charles and I have been getting ready for this and looking forward to being with all of you. And Charles, you and Karen, we both remain in our prayers always. You mean so much to our congregation. So just feel the love through the screen tonight for both you and Karen. To all of you, it's been wonderful to be together. Thank you to Charles. Thank you to Krista for your help tonight. Thank you to all of you for setting aside a night to come. And I bet you've been looking forward to it too, and just this time to be with Charles. I've been excited to host this conversation, just because I know Charles, like you, and his observations are always so helpful, and especially now with his experience with cancer. And I hope that you walk away tonight from what he's shared just with some hopeful direction, and just having a piece of that love, joy, peace, that ease in your life too, as you ponder some of your practices and ways that you're surrendering to God and finding that hand of love there for you. I'd invite you to stay connected with this ministry area in the coming weeks and months. Remember the Looking Within podcast that we have come out every Monday, more sessions and small groups that I'll be pulling together for the fall. And I think we'll have Charles back again we'd love to do like a session on retirement or something, and we'll have him back again to have some discussions. For now, though, I'd like to close our evening with a blessing, and I often do this in my sessions with the prayer for protection. And I would invite you to raise your hands as we just extend this blessing to everyone on screen. And we can't see everyone, but there are 52 people right now listening. And the Spirit has been moving tonight as we're together and as Charles has been talking. And we had insights into our own lives. And that's the point of this night, to hear Charles and all that he's offered, and then to take that into our own journey. And now to send a blessing to all of you. I'll speak it, but think of these words as being shared amongst us. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you, everyone. Charles, thank you. Thank you for being with us, and have a wonderful evening and rest of the week. God's blessings to you on your journey. Good night.